This is the most dangerous storm in history, a storm that almost ended the world as we know it, and most people have no idea that it even happened. In the year 1970, in a small bay located off of India, the clouds rumbled with proof that a massive storm was about to hit. However, 800 miles north, the East Pakistanis go about their daily lives, completely unaware of the impending threat brewing in the distant waters. On November 8, 1970, a collection of slow, swirling clouds are detected deep into the Bengal Bay, proof that a mini-tropical storm is about to form. On November 9th, in a single day, this area undergoes a rapid change. A change into a full-fledged tropical storm. The beginning of a hurricane or cyclone is near. On November 10th, the storm strengthens, but a very distinct path is formed for the storm. A path that, to the shock of those watching the radars, was seen to be heading directly towards the coast of East Pakistan at an alarming speed. Finally, on November 11th, the storm intensified into the strongest class of a tropical storm, a severe cyclone. The cyclone moved towards land with no sign of stopping. However, most people near the bay would ignore the storm, because storms of this size are fairly common for the area. But unfortunately, completely unknown to everybody at the time, this once small collection of clouds was going to prove to be very different. It was going to prove to be much more effective at destruction. Known notoriously as the most deadly and destructive natural disaster in history, the Bola cyclone is a great example of what happens when a perfect storm hits the Earth. After the cyclone reached its peak, it became very obvious where it was going to hit, and it was going to hit very soon. But there was one problem. At this point, still, no one near the bay seemed to care about the storm. With a storm this size, meteorologists and radar watchers would be violently sounding alarms telling people to take shelter and prepare for the storm. But instead, nothing? The truth is, I lied. It's not that the Pakistanis thought the storm wasn't that bad, it's that the East Pakistanis had no idea the storm was even coming in the first place. With a storm this big, a complete and utter failure of emergency systems wouldn't just be a small problem. It would prove to be absolutely murderous. In 1970, East Pakistan was not granted with very many emergency systems. Radars, sirens, and pretty much anything to detect and warn civilians of a deadly storm was very few and far between. On top of this, the Pakistanis also didn't really have a system to handle storms when they hit either. But what's odd is that the countries that surrounded Pakistan did. India, for example, had good enough weather detection systems and detected the storm way back when it first formed. India knew this entire time that the storm was raging towards Pakistan. But because of the two wars between India and Pakistan, political tension between the two countries would mean that India might have had no interest in alerting the Pakistanis of the storm earlier. The Pakistanis were not told anything about the storm from anyone. Obviously, this would prove to be a massive problem for the East Pakistanis. Not being able to prepare for a storm like this and being hit without any protection is, to say the least, absolutely horrifying. But what if I told you that not knowing when the storm would hit would be the absolute least of their worries? Because around the time of November 12th, the dark night sky harbored the most dangerous part of this entire disaster: a full moon. Why would a full moon be the most dangerous part of this storm? Well, that answer is the reason that this storm just got kicked up to a whole nother level of destruction. It's the reason this storm is the most dangerous storm in history. It's because of high tides. When the moon is full, the gravitational pull from the moon makes all tides roughly 20% higher. The tide is risen dramatically. But with the high tides already being dangerous and the water being significantly higher up on the shore, the Bola cyclone now has a huge destructive advantage, allowing the cyclone to literally drag the ocean and horrifyingly allow it to take over the land of East Pakistan. The Bola cyclone was about to hit at literally the worst possible time. However, the people would finally get some disaster warnings on the 12th. After realizing the true danger of this monstrous cyclone, the meteorologist department in Pakistan had finally issued a report and dispersed a radio message warning of the cyclone. But the meteorologist department had limited information, because their information came from central Pakistan. In central Pakistan, they had developed a new system to rate storms, a 1 to 4 scale, with 4 being the most dangerous. But back in East Pakistan, they were still using the old-fashioned 1 to 10 point scale, 10 being the most dangerous. So when the radio had transmitted in a few jumbled words, "Great dangers ahead, scale 4, the civilians were not only confused, but they shook it off, assuming 4 is nowhere near as bad as 10. But little did they know, 4 was catastrophic. But unfortunately, a simple radio message would not be enough to sway most residents. Most people wouldn't take the storm too seriously just from a simple radio message. Why was there such a lack of preparation for this storm? It's not like this was the first time a storm like this has happened either. In the past, multiple deadly hurricanes in the area had killed thousands, and due to these horrible disasters, the Central Pakistani government contacted the American government for help in developing better preparation for storms. But for political reasons between West and East Pakistan, the Central Pakistani government didn't seem to carry out many of the plans they should have for East Pakistan. East Pakistan was seriously getting the short end of the stick here from pretty much everything. But at this point, it was already too late to try and fix things. The Bula cyclone was about to hit the shores of East Pakistan. The horrifying cyclone was about to make land. And to top all of this off, East Pakistan, which is now known as Bangladesh, is a very low coastal country. Its land barely rises above the water. The country is only 33 feet above sea level. Water on high tides alone floods the country. Hundreds of thousands of people live on the coast of the country. Hundreds of thousands of people that had no idea how big the effect of this cyclone would be. On November 12th, the Bula cyclone would strike the hundreds of thousands of people near the shore with absolute ferocity. And as the cyclone closed in on the land, the sun had fully set, and pitch black dark night had hit. Many people would be instantly surprised by the pure and utter raw, disgusting power of a cyclone that has finally reached its peak. The Bula cyclone had finally hit the shore. Rising waters, absurd winds, rain that stings like 1,000 needles, and a storm surge and flood upwards of 33 feet high in some areas. Houses are completely leveled. The floods and ocean reach the roofs of most houses, spelling pure and utter catastrophe for those involved anywhere near the shore. There was no safety. There was no way of countering this storm, and no one even knew that it was coming. Thousands of families struggled to the top of their homes. Many would pray that their house was tall enough, but unfortunately, a tall enough house wasn't very common. Most houses were entirely swallowed by the sea. In Manpura, one of the hundreds of isolated islands along the shore being hit, the man Hai and his family struggled to the top of their home as the flood poured and heightened by the minute. Luckily, Hai's home was one of the more sturdy and solid homes in the area, and luckily it also had a second floor. Most of the other homes did not, and were not nearly as sturdy. The area was severely underprepared for a flood of 20 feet high. Hai and his family waited as they watched the flood reach slowly above the steps of their second floor. With time running fast and the flood rising faster, I realized the flood would entirely engulf the two-story home. He realized that the massive 20-foot storm surge would engulf everything on the coast and more. Safety in homes was not an option. The only way to survive this storm was to not be anywhere near it. His family was sobbing. Even the men cried and screamed. All of this had happened in 8 minutes for the family that was told a small cyclone would hit. A family that's home was more than half a mile away from shore. Eventually, Hai and his brother struggled to the roof of the house to hopefully get everybody up there away from the flood. But when they got up there, they would be barraged with the heaviest storm imaginable. 155-mile-per-hour winds and rain would sting the men like BBs on their skin, and the roof would bend and creak from just 2 people standing on top of it. Having the entire family up there was completely out of the question. However, in a split moment, Hai realized. He realized they had a massive, tall and strong coconut tree 2 feet next to the house. His idea was for everybody to jump to the tree and hold on to it. Everybody would be able to jump. It was a 2-foot jump that even his grandma could make. Hai yelled his idea to the others and said he would try to make the jump first as a pioneer. But in the middle of the night with no vision, this jump was extremely dangerous. But regardless, he went for it. Hai jumped in the middle of the storm to the coconut tree, and he made it. So he yelled, I made it," to the others, hoping that they would follow him. To no response. Assuming the storm was too loud, he yelled again, but heard a wave crash over the roof of the house. Hai, still with hope that his family could jump, waited. Continuously yelling, "I made it," the waves slapped against the roof with unrelenting power, and the water continued to rise. Hai called out to his mom, desperate for a response. And with his cries turning from triumph and survival to despair, Hai called out to God. For the next hour or so, Hai would cling violently to the swaying palm tree, grinding his arms into the tree. Absolutely exhausted from holding on for hours in insane winds and rain, Hai would almost give into the waters below to join his family. He knew he could hold on no longer. His muscles were exhausted and he had had enough of this storm. Hai wanted to join his family. But just before he was about to give up, the storm fully and utterly stopped. Absolutely confused, Hai looked around. Everything came to a halt. The strong winds came to a small breeze, the rain was a light shower, and everything calmed. Hai was in the eye of the storm. Looking around, all he saw was water, debris, and dead bodies floating everywhere. The only significant landmarks were trees in the top 3 feet of the Mampura High School, a 3-story building. But Hai heard his uncle and aunt yelling for help trapped in their home, so he jumped into the flood and swam to their house. He got on top of the house and ripped a hole into the roof and helped them escape. He asked where everyone was, and his uncle yelled that they were all gone. But in true and utter annoyance and lack of care, the storm would not wait for Hai and his uncle to mourn the deaths of their family, because somewhere far over the ocean, an angry growl presented itself over the sky. Like a group of diesel trucks starting up all at the same time, the storm had returned. Hai and his uncle and aunt all gripped tightly onto tall trees, and gusts of winds were hitting back at 150 miles per hour. They dug their scratched and cut arms into the tree's bark, holding on for dear life, and stayed there, in the winds and rain, gripping as hard as they could for the entire night. And at 4 in the morning, the cyclone's outer edges would pass Mampura, and Hai would plop down onto the faint bits of his roof that finally showed out of the water. He laid there, completely motionless, with the bodies of his entire family floating in the water below him. Hai had survived, but he was exhausted, broken, and all he wanted to do was die. After the Bola cyclone came to an end, Hai's Mampura recorded that 40,000 of the 50,000 residents were all dead. The floods would recede and the hundreds of miles of destroyed land became visible. Hundreds of thousands of bodies were washed out into the Bay of Bengal. 90% of all of the homes were destroyed. All of the millions of people along the shore and in the country of Bangladesh experienced the exact same thing as Hai. The flooding, the holding onto trees and hoping for survival, and the lack of preparation due to lack of information from central Pakistan. Everyone that survived was absolutely heartbroken and understandably, beyond their retching guts, absolutely furious at the central Pakistani government for the lack of information. But you're probably wondering, how in the world did this lead to almost ending the world? Well, the answer to that is much darker than you think it is, and it starts way back right before the storm even hit. In West Pakistan, the head of government, Yahya Khan, made a terrifying decision during the cyclone. He chose on purpose not to provide aid or help for the storm to East Pakistan at all. He chose not to tell them anything or help them at all. Why? Because he believed that the East Pakistanis wouldn't vote for him in the upcoming election. So his solution was to kill as many people as he could so he didn't have to worry about bad voters. A disgusting decision that one of his generals later addressed as, quote, a cyclone that solved about 500,000 of their problems. Fortunately, this actually backfired very badly on Khan, leading everyone across East Pakistan to unite against him to vote for a man who actually did help in the disaster, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. So how did Khan respond to this? Did he happily hand over the title of president? Nope, he actually decided to become a dictator. And to put very, very simply, instead, he jailed Mujib and started killing everyone in East Pakistan that didn't follow his orders. He started a mass genocide and said, quote, all we need to do is kill 3 million of them and the rest will eat out of our hands. So that's what he did. He started killing all Bengalis that went against him. Naturally, this started a full-fledged civil war between East and West Pakistan, with India, who did not like Pakistan, jumping in to help East Pakistan to take down West Pakistan and become their own country. However, if we're talking about countries jumping in here, the US also jumped in and supported their ally, Pakistan. Tensions soared very high with the US there, because the US sent out a warship to the Bay of Bengal. However, this was no ordinary warship. It was a nuclear warship. A nuclear warship capable of destruction close to 2,000 Hiroshima bombs. However, even worse, the Soviets, which were allied with India, came to play in the Bay of Bengal too, bringing their own nuclear warships to counter the US and protect India. This was a massive problem. We are literally looking at a full-fledged nuclear war here. Nukes in any sense of the word in this situation against two countries could start a full-fledged nuclear breakdown between their allies, and neither of the two countries would cooperate. The two inched towards each other, and the Soviets and Americans communicated to each other that they would set the whole world on fire if the other country did not back down. Neither of the two countries were backing down. It was literally a game of chicken at this point. They inched closer and closer to each other and came just about to the brink of each other, setting off the bombs. The world was only maybe a day away from nuclear fallout. But out of nowhere, back in East Pakistan, the East Pakistani resistance force in the war won. They seized the main city Dhaka, which means that East Pakistan is now Bangladesh. The war was over. Luckily, this miracle would sway everyone involved with the war away from each other, and the US and Soviets left, just days before absolute annihilation. Finally, after everything the Bangladesh went through, it was all over. But unfortunately, this wouldn't be the end, because in reality, Bangladesh had just been hit by the world's biggest cyclone and then by a massive genocide. They had nothing to establish a country. No political figures, no money, and a broken land. They were left with essentially nothing to start their country. Nothing but a genocide and a cyclone's remains. What Bangladesh experienced in 1970 was nothing short of beyond horrifying. The lack of knowledge, the high tides, the storm surge and floods, and the lack of help from everybody. And overall, the entire isolation in their own disaster. The Bula cyclone really did hit at the worst possible time. And even to date, there has not been a single storm in history that has even come close to the death count and destructiveness of the Bula cyclone, because the land of Bangladesh was stripped entirely naked to its absolute core. It was entirely ripped apart by the cyclone. But perhaps, possibly, Bangladesh was not just a naked and broken land, but instead, possibly, it was a new land to grow upon.